In 1940, the first peacetime draft in America quickly inspired musical tributes to those selected, following this announcement by President Roosevelt.
The first number drawn by the Secretary of War is serial number 158.
I'm a selecting in the Army. I'm not here for a solid year. I'm glad that I am here. For I am learning in that the outs of the Army name for mine. Here comes the story.
13 million men and women were mobilized during World War II, largely through the Selective Service Act. It was used again in Korea and Vietnam. Not until 1973 would the peacetime draft be ended.
Interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
Sunday, December 7, 1941. Japan's carrier-based planes struck a devastating blow at U.S. Pacific Fleet and military airfields in Hawaii. It was the beginning of a conflict that would rage across the Pacific for the next 3.5 years. The anger of the United States was voiced the next day by President Roosevelt as he addressed the Congress.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people, their righteous might, will win through to absolute victory.
The attack at Pearl Harbor united the American people as never before in its history.
Physical fitness for women workers in World War II. At such plants as Lockheed Aircraft in Los Angeles and War Department tank depots, 3.5 million women joined 6 million men in setting production records that amazed Hitler and Stalin. Daytime care centers for preschool children enabled their mothers to work in the war plants. For Rosie the Riveter, as she was known, there were such work-related happenings as Queen of the Welders contests. This one in Pascagoula, Mississippi, won by 19-year-old Vera Anderson. War workers would be invited to the training center at Fort Knox to test the weapons they helped build. And for the newsreel camera, they were typical statements of patriotic defiance.
Show the Japs that in their treacherous stab in the back at Pearl Harbor, they not only picked on the wrong men, but also on the wrong women.
February 1942 brought one of the most incredible episodes in modern American history. On only 48 hours' notice, more than 100,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast were forcibly removed from their homes and sent to internment camps for the duration of the war. Simply because West Coast residents feared they might commit sabotage or help an invasion, these people lost their liberty, jobs, and property. At the same time, their sons who volunteered for military service while in the internment camps were fighting in France and Italy, building a record as the most decorated unit in the United States Army.
You fought for the liberties of the world along with the rest of us. And I can't tell you how very much I appreciate the privilege of being able to show you just how much the United States of America thinks of what you've done.
Although President Truman later paid tribute to the bravery and loyalty of these men known as Nisei Japanese, the memory of their parents' internment remains a dark chapter in the home front struggle of World War II. In 1942, a shoe shine still cost only 10 cents. Bananas 10 cents a bunch. Apples 30 cents a bag. Sirloin steak 65 cents a pound. But we were at war, and there was danger of inflation. So Congress froze prices of consumer goods, especially food.
Now your weekly food bill will be lowered.
Mr. Prentice Brown, Assistant Price Administrator.
Spreading rapidly over the nation. The Office of Price Administration is setting the top prices any store can charge on nearly all the food you buy. Meat, milk, most canned goods, coffee, bread, sugar, butter, and eggs.
A combination of ration stamps and tokens, together with ceiling prices, made the Office of Price Administration a huge home front success. But then it became an overblown bureaucracy and died in 1946, a victim of political and business opposition, the black market, and its own red tape. In December 1943, President Roosevelt had gone to see America's fighting men in Sicily. He had decorated the bravest among them. On June 6, 1944, when 176,000 Allied troops were put ashore on German-held beaches in France, President Roosevelt broadcast this D-Day prayer.
Mighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Their road will be long and hard, for the enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces. Success may not come with rushing speed, but we shall return again and again. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph. The darkness will be rent by noise and flame. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom. Thy will be done, Almighty God.
On the eve of the Allied victory in Europe, April 12, 1945, President Roosevelt died. As the nation mourned his passing, it remembered his words.
There have always been those who did not believe in the people, who attempted to block their forward movement across history, to force them back to servility and suffering and silence. The people have now gathered their strength. They are moving forward in their might and power, and no force, no combination of forces, no trickery, deceit or violence can stop them now. They see before them the hope of the world, a decent, secure, peaceful.
The final farewell to the Commander-in-Chief would always be remembered by those who were witnesses to that sorrowful day. When President Roosevelt died in April 1945, after 12 years in office, millions the world over were stunned. World War II had not yet ended, and few outside of Washington knew of the resolve and fortitude of Harry S. Truman, the man who would succeed FDR. Historians would come to rate him our 8th greatest president, but our allies everywhere breathed easier with his first words to the Congress.
I call upon all Americans to help me keep our nation united in defense of those ideals which have been so eloquently proclaimed by Franklin Roosevelt, so that there can be no possible misunderstanding. Both Germany and Japan can be certain, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that America will continue the fight for freedom until no vestige of resistance remains.
On August 6, 1945, the day of the bomb, President Truman explained to the American people why Hiroshima had been selected as the target.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. That was because we wished in this first attack to avoid, insofar as possible, the killing of civilians. But that attack is only a warning of things to come. If Japan does not surrender, bombs will have to be dropped on war industries, and unfortunately, thousands of civilian lives will be lost.
The bomb did end the war, but it ushered in the age of nuclear weapons, and Hiroshima lives on as a reminder of their power. When World War II ended in Europe, the release of soldiers was determined by a point system. 1 point for each month of service, 5 for each combat wound, decoration, or major battle, and 1 point for each month served overseas. 85 points would bring a GI home, while only 45 would earn discharge for a whack. Sailors and Marines were enraged to find their services had no plan ready, but by summer the ruptured duck veterans pin was on their lapels as well. 500,000 men were home even before the atomic bomb ended the war with Japan. The new GI Bill of Rights would help the veterans obtain education, job training, and job security. In 1952, the bill was modified to include veterans of the Korean War, and by 1976, more than 29 million Americans would be receiving benefits from the Veterans Administration, including veterans of the Vietnam War.
As the GIs returned from World War II, President Truman wanted to avoid the dangers of inflation by retaining wartime price controls.
We as a nation have it within our hands to make this post-war period an era of the greatest opportunity and prosperity in our nation's history. Your determination to retain price controls and so prevent inflation must be made known to the Congress.
The President of the United States has demanded that Congress and the people turn the clock backwards. He advocates a return to the days of war, of the OPA.
Truman's leading opponent was Republican Senator Robert A. Taft of Ohio.
We stand at the crossroads today between a free America and a planned economy. This is the last stand of the planners who think they know how to run the people's affairs better than the people themselves.
Effective measures were not forthcoming, and a severe inflationary spiral set in. Inflation and unemployment have continued to haunt the American economy for decades, re-emerging periodically as leading political issues throughout our modern history.
The Frank Sinatra mania began in the early 1940s. He had worked as a reporter for a small New Jersey paper. Then he joined the Hoboken Four Quartet and later sang with Tommy Dorsey, Harry James, and the Hit Parade on radio. Rejected for military service because of a punctured eardrum, he became the idol of the Bobby Soxers. They stood out of doors for hours to catch a quick glimpse of Frankie Boy. He won an Academy Award for From Here to Eternity in 1953, but won his first movie popularity award in 1946 after It Happened in Brooklyn.
Frank, I'm proud to tell you that the readers of the Modern Screen magazine have selected you as the most popular film star of 1946. I take great pleasure in presenting you this bronze bust of yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sincerely grateful to you and to the readers of Modern Screen magazine. And I'm very happy about the whole thing. Thank you very much.
With President Truman, Britain's former Prime Minister Winston Churchill came to Fulton, Missouri, where on March 5th, 1946, he coined the expression Iron Curtain in describing Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe.
I do not believe that Soviet Russia desires war. What they desire is the fruits of war and the indefinite expansion of their power and doctrines.
An iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere.
In 1947, President Harry Truman, unpopular with Congress, decided that General George C. Marshall, Secretary of State and former war hero, should carry the torch for his European recovery program. Marshall was candid with Congress.
Whether we like it or not, we find ourselves, our nation, in a world position of vast responsibility. We can act for our own good by acting for the world's good.
The so-called Marshall Plan was signed into law on April 3, 1947. Its aim was to help 16 non-communist countries rebuild their economies. In a Germany divided, West Germany became a showcase for our foreign policy. This unprecedented American investment would cost $13 billion before ending on schedule in 1951. It strengthened democracy in Europe, accented Soviet repression, and created healthy trading partners for the free world. Alger Hiss, former high-ranking State Department official, had denied ever knowing Whittaker Chambers, self-confessed communist spy.
Have you ever seen this individual who is standing?
I have.
As who?
As George Crosby.
In 1935 was the last time that you saw him.
According to my best recollection, not having checked the record.
Now, will you remain standing a moment, Mr. Hiss? Mr. Chambers, do you know the individual who is now standing at the witness stand? Who is he? When did you first meet Mr. Hiss? 1934. When did you last see Mr. Hiss? 1938. Have a seat. Sit down.
This dramatic confrontation took place on August 25, 1948, before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Alger Hiss continued to deny Chambers' charge that he had spied for the Soviet Union. Hiss was convicted of perjury, sentenced to 5 years in jail.
I want to say to you that for the next 4 years, there'll be a Democrat in the White House and you're looking at him.
Election year 1948. The Democratic Party is split. President Truman's chances look dim. Republican Thomas E. Dewey is confident of winning.
I pledge to you that on next January 20, there will begin in Washington the biggest unraveling, unsnarling, untangling operation in our nation's history.
But Truman does not intend to lose. He embarks upon a massive whistle-stop campaign, hitting 400 cities and towns across the nation. His hard-hitting enthusiasm grips the American people, and in November, he stuns the pollsters with his victory.
Grandma Moses did not start painting until she was 76 years old. Though critics called her work primitive, and some said her reputation was out of all proportion to her achievement, most agreed that Grandma Moses had captured that special magic of life. Commemorating that sparkle, President Truman named the 88-year-old painter one of 1949's Women of Achievement.
Great pleasure to present this certificate to you, General.
Thank you, our President.
Returning to her home near Eagle Bridge, New York, Grandma Moses continued to paint each day until shortly before her death on December 13, 1961, at the age of 101. I look back on my life like a good day's work, she wrote. It was done, and I feel satisfied with it. September 15th, 1950. The North Koreans had invaded the South 3 months before. Now a surprise amphibious landing at Incheon, conceived and commanded by General Douglas MacArthur, would cut off the North Korean invaders and temporarily free all of South Korea. President Truman was grateful.
It is fortunate for the world that we had the right man for this purpose, a man who is a very great soldier, General Douglas MacArthur.
Soon MacArthur yearned to pursue the enemy into North Korea. Truman and the UN approved, but the president warned MacArthur to avoid any Chinese or Russian units he might find there. MacArthur criticized Truman's restrictive attitude, and while young Americans fought and died, the two aging leaders met on Wake Island in the Pacific. Their meeting was private, their appearances cordial. But 7 months later, MacArthur would be fired by Truman for advocating an invasion of Red China.